Hi and welcome to the Week in Politics with Michelle Grattan. I'm Caroline Fisher, an Associate Professor of Journalism at the University of Canberra. Hi Michelle.
Hi Caroline.
Well, a big week in US politics here in Australia and around the world.
Indeed, and that has implications of course for us and everyone else around the world.
Look, before we get on to the US election, there's actually still been quite a few local issues closer to home. So last weekend, Labor won the election in Queensland. So Anastasia Palaszczuk has secured a third term. What lessons are there from her victory over the weekend?
This was very much a COVID election. The Premier ran on keeping Queenslanders safe, and Queenslanders certainly were appreciative of that story and of the very limited number of cases that have been in the state. I think that if it hadn't been for COVID, the Labor Party would have been under more pressure. And of course, a third term is always an ask, although Labor in recent times has really been the party of government in Queensland. The Liberal National Party too, it's a merged party in that state, was pretty weak. It didn't have a convincing agenda. Its leader had only recently come into the job, and I think that while she improved in the campaign, people just weren't willing to give her the trust and the support to enable them to change their vote. The other interesting thing about the election, Caroline, was that One Nation's vote collapsed, and so you saw votes going back to the major parties, but the One Nation vote that stayed tended to go to Labor through preferences, and that may well have been older people who, in the end, were worried about the virus.
So the only seat that Labor lost was in the inner city seat around West End, and so the former Deputy Premier Jackie Trad lost her seat there, and it was won by the Greens. Now we've got some, senior Labor Party people in hotly contested inner city seats where the Greens have a strong presence. Tanya Plibersek, Anthony Albanese. Do you think that they will face similar pressures?
They always face some pressure from the Greens, but I don't think this indicates they're facing any greater pressure because the Liberal National Party preferenced Jackie Trad over the Labor Party in that seat, and that was important in getting her across the line. Now, there was some internal controversy in the LNP about doing that, but they were rather desperate to reduce any Labor numbers they could. I think it was a rather short-term decision, especially as things turned out, but I don't think we would see that happening nationally.
Okay, so another person who's lost their position this week is, of course, the CEO of Australia Post, Christine Holgate, over the decision to purchase Cartier watches, it seems. Now, you talked about the core of that scandal last week. Has this issue now been put to bed?
I don't think it has been put to bed because there are quite a few critics around of the government about how she was treated, and I think that we're going to get a bit more information when the chair of Australia Post appears before Senate estimates early next week, and we'll see whether there was or is a lot of extravagance in that organisation. If there is, that'll back the government's case, although not frankly necessarily justify it. But I think that if it comes out that really there's not a huge amount to see, then criticism will be intensified about how the Prime Minister went somewhat over the top in his comments in Parliament about Christine Holgate and these watches. If it had been cash, it would have been hardly a story, I think, but Cartier watches really seems to hit a button. One wonders what the Cartier watch people think about this publicity. Is it good on the principle that any publicity is good publicity, or would they rather not have it?
To the economy, on Tuesday the Reserve Bank announced unprecedented action to help the economy, including taking the official cash rates to nearly 0.1%, and unveiled some other measures. Will these measures make a big difference, do you think, in helping the economy?
I think what's important here is that the Reserve Bank, which really had almost run out of ammunition, frankly, to stimulate the economy, is nevertheless trying everything it can do. But the big thing will be confidence, and whether people's behaviour, whether businesses or indeed consumers, whether their behaviour is affected by these measures, only the coming months will tell. But at least what we're seeing from the bank and the government is a commitment to do everything possible to reduce unemployment as far and as fast as it can be reduced. And I think that that is quite an important commitment at a time like this. People at least feel that there is some security there, some will by the official family, by bank, by government to do what can be done.
Though when it comes to mortgage repayments, we're not going to see a lot of difference really, are we, with this change?
No, not a lot of difference. And of course there are losers, because self-funded retirees who are depending on savings and investments get less. So it's not all upside, but nevertheless I think that it's good that it was done.
Okay, and so the government has also taken some more action on the COVID-19 vaccine front. They've secured access to 2 more vaccines, taking us, I think, to a total of 4. What's the strategy of having deals with 4 vaccines?
Well, the strategy is that you maximise your chances of getting a vaccine early, because of course these are still in the final trial stages, and then there have to be approvals and so on. So you do have a broad portfolio and therefore hope that one of them will come through ASAP. And of course you also spread the manufacturing base of vaccines, so there's more chance of getting them made quickly as well as available quickly.
Okay. Look, lastly, to the US election, no final result yet, but it does look like that Biden might win. So what's this going to mean for Prime Minister Scott Morrison and for Australia?
I think it will mean just a more normal sort of presidency, less surprises, less shocks. But of course we have to see how it works out. Assuming that Joe Biden wins in the United States, it will have been quite a close contest, one in which President Trump has got more support than the polls were suggesting. So it's another knock, incidentally, for the credibility of the polling industry, which seems not able to get anything right. But a Biden presidency would be particularly significant for Australia on a couple of fronts. One is how he would handle China, whether he dialed down the tensions there. One would expect that if he did, it would be a matter of degree rather than a turnaround, a dramatic turnaround of policy. But of course, China policy is a very sensitive area for Australia at the moment, which has this really bad relationship with China and a lot of pressure on our trading front. The other big issue would be climate change, and a Biden presidency which would be much more assertive on this and would put more pressure on Australia, which is already finding itself increasingly the odd man out. Boris Johnson talked to Scott Morrison a little while ago and emphasised the importance of getting down to net zero emissions. It was interesting that in the Downing Street readout of that conversation, that point was reported. In the Australian readout from the Prime Minister's office, there was no mention of that.
I see. Well, look, we've got to get back to watching the count to find out who finally does win the US election. Thanks very much, and speak to you next week.
Thanks a lot.